Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We will take another 30 seconds or so to let people come into the webinar, and then we will get started. All right, we've got a good number of people who've joined, so I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. Thank you all so much for attending the webinar today. We're going to be talking about how times have changed. The benefits of transparency now outweigh the risks. And before we dive into the content, just sharing some logistics. As you can see, we're recording this, so we'll be sharing the recording and the slides that we go through today with everyone who's registered for the webinar afterwards. So you don't have to worry about taking notes on everything we talk about. We'll also save as much time as we can at the end for a live Q&A. So if you have questions as we're going through, please feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat to ask your questions. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. And if we don't get to your question, we'll try to share resources in our follow-up that will answer them. And then to introduce ourselves, my name is Hannah. I lead stakeholder engagement for our organization Open Supply Hub, which we'll share a little bit more about in a bit. And I'm joined by my colleague Ariane, who's our product sales and marketing manager. You'll hear from her later in the presentation as well. We're both thrilled to be speaking with you today. And I think the spirit of this presentation is very much one where in our work, we've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of brands, retailers, companies about transparency and the practices and the systems and the changes they've gone through and are sharing some of those learnings back with you all. I think with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And we'll start with some words from you, from the brands and retailers in this community that we've heard. Things like, we were able to visualize our supply chain for the first time. We were able to ensure one generic agreed upon name for each of our suppliers. We have reached new levels of clarity around how we categorize processes occurring at supplier facilities, been more energized to standardize the data we're collecting. We've been able to engage with numerous organizations globally and enhanced our understanding of salient risks. In times of crisis, we've been able to collaborate with other organizations connected to our suppliers. We're working on lowering our supply chain GHG emissions, which means working closely with suppliers and other brands to improve energy efficiency and switch to renewable energy supplies. All of these are stories of companies talking about their transparency work. But you'll notice that none of them actually talked about transparency in sort of the outcome that they achieved. We heard things like getting rid of data headaches, easier data sharing and communication, finding collaborators, understanding and mitigating risk. So in all of these cases, transparency wasn't the end goal necessarily, but a means to these other outcomes. And that's very much the spirit that we want to bring to this presentation, this session today, to give you frameworks, tools, questions you can ask to help transition the conversation from transparency to transparency's sake to transparency that solves problems. And I think we think about all of those stories that we just heard, and you might be asking, why isn't this the norm? Why isn't all transparency lined up to have this kind of impact? And what we've heard from companies we've worked with is that too often, transparency is kind of seen as this separate and disconnected initiative from other key goals, resources, initiatives that you might be working on. And we've heard things like, oh, someone just told me to publish a supplier list because we need to meet this specific requirement, or we have really limited resources, and so all we can really get away with is putting a PDF on our website and leaving that once a year. That there are a lot of myths around transparency that are sort of permeating companies and conversations that can kind of stop people from having the conversations that they want to have. And all of this and more leads to this place where you're not getting benefit from transparency, so it keeps getting deprioritized. The data goes out of date, which means you get even less value. And it's kind of this death spiral for transparency where it's not something you want to prioritize because there isn't a ton of value to be had. And so we really want to help make sure that doesn't happen and take the conversation to a place where, okay, why am I doing this work? What am I getting out of being transparent? Why is this strategically critical for my company? And if we frame sort of the design of our systems around transparency for that, we move away from a box checking exercise to transparency being an integral part of sort of strategies and systems and work today. And before we get into some of those best practices, making sure that we're centering on the same definitions and terms for the sake of this conversation. Obviously, companies can be transparent about a number of different things. For this webinar today, we're going to talk about supplier transparency. So that's publicly sharing the production locations in your supply chain, as many tiers as you may have mapped. And some best practices around that when you're sharing supplier data, make sure it's easy to find so that it's in an open and accessible place, that it's easy to work with in a machine readable format is generally considered best practice, and easy to take action. So no matter what you're doing with your transparency efforts at your company, those are generally principles to follow. And we come from the world of open data where this is talked about a lot. And so bringing in sort of a best practice from that school of thought, which is the FAIR principles, which is that if you're opening up data and you want it to be effective, then that data needs to be findable, it needs to be accessible, it needs to be interoperable, and it needs to be reusable. And so we'll talk throughout the session today about some ways that you can get your supplier data into a FAIR format as it's listed here, but would just offer anytime you're thinking about publishing something, does it follow these four terms, and how can you make it as effective as possible? The last sort of defining piece before we jump into more of the content is, are we talking transparency? Are we talking traceability? And we know those two terms can get conflated and confused in different conversations. So for the sake of today, we say, think of transparency like a map. These are the production locations. These are the organizations connected to each of those production locations. Traceability draws lines through the map, showing how a product or a component moves through it. And so while traceability and transparency should absolutely be interconnected, should be entwined, should be sort of flowing into one another in your systems and your work, for the purposes of today, we are talking about the transparency side of things and not traceability. All right, so first meaty section to dive into, and these are questions and topics that we hear a lot from companies, which is, there are these myths, we're calling them myths for the sake of this conversation, but frequently asked questions might be another way to frame it, that everyone is hearing from different stakeholders, either within your company or outside, who are saying, I don't know if we want to be publishing supplier data. I believe XYZ thing is true. But when you actually interrogate that statement, you realize that conditions have changed enough today, or that it doesn't necessarily hold water. So we'll jump into a few of the most common myths, but encourage you to put others in the chat, and we can talk about them at the end if we have time. So the first is, if I'm a brand or retailer saying, okay, if we open up our supply chain data, won't civil society organizations come after us for issues in our supply chain? And there are a few sort of maybe reframes to offer around this. In the sort of legislative environment that we're in, where due diligence is becoming such a high priority for so many companies, it's just less and less the posture of companies to be saying civil society is coming after us, or we don't want to know about these problems, and more, we need to know about the problems in our supply chain. We need to be involved in resolving grievances to be able to have effective due diligence programs. And so by opening up your data, you are in fact inviting organizations to work with you directly on remediation rather than turning to the press or more public tactics. And that's often the preferred result for both parties involved. And so it's an opportunity to learn what's happening in your supply chain and be a part of the solution. And then secondly, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you share your supply chain data, organizations who have information about what's happening with your suppliers or in regions you're working in are able to proactively reach out to you and let you know what's going on so you can preemptively work on solutions. Both of these things are, we're hearing from companies, far, far, far more beneficial than what is turning into a smaller and smaller risk of this particular disclosure leading to some kind of sort of public moment that that might be less desirable. So that's the first myth. The second one, will we lose our competitive advantage by sharing where our production happens? And I think there are a few things to pull out of this one. The first, and this, we know this isn't true of every sector or every supply chain, but largely in the world of information sharing that we live in, chances are your production locations are not a secret if somebody really wants to go and figure out sort of who's connected to your supply chain with all of the trade and shipping records and various databases that are becoming available. There's just more and more information that more and more stakeholders can access. And so transparency and sharing your supply chain data becomes being in control of the story that you're telling about your supply chain, about saying, these are my suppliers, and this is the type of conversation that I'm here to have. So being sort of in the driver's seat of your supply chain data instead of learning, oh, this person figured out that we're connected to this supplier, and now we have to sort of respond in a reactive way. We also are hearing more and more that competitive advantage is not sort of a Rolodex of suppliers and whether or not you're connected to them. That sort of speaks to the first point, because that's unlikely to be a secret for much longer if it is at all, and more about the quality or the nature of relationships with suppliers. And so that's not something you have to disclose as part of your transparency work. And that's the piece that really gives you the competitive advantage if you're thinking about sort of your sourcing strategy. And then lastly, would just say in the spirit of this entire presentation, this is a mindset that just has to shift if we're all going to do the work that we want to do, if we're all going to conduct effective due diligence, if we're all going to work on improvements in our supply chain. Competitive advantage has to come from working collaboratively and doing that work well, rather than holding data really close and working behind the scenes. So that's myth number 2. And then myth number 3, are there privacy concerns with publishing my supplier data? I'm not your lawyer or your legal team, but there's sets of your data that's sort of deemed phone book data. So think about the country name and address of your suppliers, and we'll talk a little bit about what that can look like with our platform. It's publicly available. It's sort of what you would find in a phone book. And there's so much benefit that can be derived just from sharing that really basic data set. And so you don't have to publish data that would violate privacy concerns, GDPR, any of these other regulations to get value from transparency. And I think there's a bit of a misconception that you have to publish every piece of information that you have about a supplier to get benefit from transparency, when in fact, it just takes a little bit of information to unlock a whole lot of value. So myth number 3, we'll leave that one there. As I said, we're talking about those 3 today, but if you have others that you've heard from people that you want to put in the chat or the Q&A, we can talk about them at the end. The next big sort of topic to dive into is this idea of collectively, communally building a better data set that we can all work with, and transparency leading to that data set's existence. And so introducing sort of the idea of a supply chain data commons. And if you think about work that many of you are probably doing, where maybe you're collecting information from your suppliers or from different service providers or platforms that you're working with, and you realize, okay, there are a couple of different aliases for this supplier. I think I'm missing some key information in the address of this particular supplier. That's work that you're doing over here, and another brand might be doing the exact same thing over here. And if you're doing that work in the open, if you're sharing your data, once you've identified those aliases, check that information is out there in the commons. We've created that sort of higher piece of data quality for that facility for everyone. Once we've put together all of the components of an address, check that exists out there in the commons for everyone. So rather than duplicating efforts in all of our individual databases, how do we collectively contribute to elevating the quality of data for everyone who's touching supply chains? Then I can imagine everyone in this call is familiar with the idea of audit fatigue, where facility suppliers, producers are getting the same requests for information over and over and over again from all of the different types of organizations that they're working with. By working openly with sort of a base data set, that phone book level data that we're talking about, if a supplier is able to share their data in one open place that everybody's going to and say, okay, this is the basic information about my operations, then all these different organizations can get that basic information from there and reduce sort of the number of requests that are going to that particular supplier over and over again. And then lastly, we know that there's this really crowded world of service providers and tools and platforms that are helping with due diligence, with reporting, with auditing, with all of these really important practices. And different companies are building their own sort of stacks of technology providers that they're working with. And if each time you're connecting to a different service provider, you're doing a data cleaning and matching exercise, and that's happening at scale with every company and every service provider that's out there, just think of all of that duplicative work that's happening over and over and over again. And instead, what if we all start from the same base data set and then build out sort of the richer, more bespoke data sets from there? And so this idea of, yes, I'm getting better data for myself, and yes, I'm doing cleaning, yes, I'm doing the work I need to do, but extending that out to I am contributing to a better data set for the entire sector is one big benefit that if we all sort of agree to and opt into, the value is pretty limitless. And then the third piece that I don't think you can have a webinar about supply chain data now without talking about is legislation. And maybe despite some of the recent bumps around CSDDD, we still see the volume of sustainability and due diligence legislation growing. This very much feels like the direction of travel. And what we hear from some organizations is, okay, we'll do the work of due diligence and sort of information gathering, and then we'll worry about transparency afterward. That's sort of the thing we'll do after the fact. And what we'd like to encourage is flipping that and thinking about transparency as this critical first investment that you make that makes everything else that you need to do to satisfy these requirements easier. And so a few pillars to that. If you're sharing your data and sort of following the FAIR principles, then you will have a data set that's really easy to work with, that if somebody inside your organization needs information on your supply chain, if a regulator needs information, if you need to share it with an external stakeholder, it's really easy for you to quickly grab and share the data that you need, which sounds simple, but can be a huge hassle if you're sort of having to create bespoke reports and share data all the time and you're not set up for success there. Then to that piece about sort of creating your stack of tech providers, if your data is open and set up to play well with others, anytime you add a new provider or solution to your ecosystem, it is that much easier to connect, get the sort of data cleaning and matching process over as fast as possible and get to the actual work. And so making sure that your data plays nicely with others. And then ultimately, the goal of any due diligence program is to actually do the due diligence to make improvements in your supply chain. And I don't think I've been to a conference in recent years where collaboration wasn't sort of the front and center message. But the issue that everyone seems to be running into is we really want to collaborate, but we don't know who else is sharing our suppliers. We don't know who is sourcing from the same regions or landscapes that we are. And so if you're working in the open, it's so much easier to make sure that when you get to that place, you know who your collaborators are and you've sort of designed that from the very beginning, rather than creating these closed and more complicated systems and then trying to come in from the back and say, okay, wait a minute, who else is working with me and who can I collaborate with on this work? And so we just encourage thinking about how can you get transparency in as early as possible to enable all of these other pieces that will come along the way as you're doing due diligence work. And so with this conversation and sort of everything I've shared, maybe you're in a place where you're saying, okay, great, transparency sounds good. How do we do it? And that's where we would like to talk to you a little bit about Open Supply Hub, which is the organization that Ariane and I work at, and that we hope can be a tool for you in your transparency work to make sure you are getting all of this value and benefit that we are talking about that is on the table waiting for you. So Open Supply Hub, we're an NGO and essentially building a world where supply chain data is open, trusted, and harnessed to benefit people and planet. You can almost think of us as a Wikipedia of supply chain data, where any organization who's connected to production locations can share data on our platform. We standardize it, make it easy to work with, and then make it available in a public good for anyone to search, download, make use of. And what you end up with is a map of the world's production locations and who's connected to them. So you can do searches like, how does my supply chain overlap with X other brand? Who is sourcing from this same region that I'm sourcing from? We'll show some other examples in a little bit of how that works, but just making it really easy to find collaborators and do collective action work. And there are basically 3 pillars to our model. The first is, I mentioned sort of a Wikipedia of supply chain data. So as all of these organizations are sharing data on Open Supply Hub, our system is built on an algorithm and a statistical model that's trained to find the variations that exist in the names and addresses of production locations. And so if 15 different stakeholders are all uploading data about a particular production site and they all refer to that site in different ways, that will all get matched to a single profile and then assigned an industry standard universal free ID. And the idea is that ID acts as a decoder ID that can run across all the different systems and platforms and service providers that you might be working with. And that's where that sort of interoperability and standardization piece comes into play. So as organizations are sharing their data, we're cleaning it up, we're making it easier to work with, and then it lives in a public good. So anyone who wants to share, search, download, make use of that data is able to do so. And when you have a standardized interoperable data set that is built using open data principles, that's what gets us to a place where we can enable global collaboration really easily. Because as you'll see in a moment, when you look at a production location on our platform, you can see all of the organizations connected to it. So if you're trying to resolve a grievance, you can see civil society organizations working there. You can see other brands who are sourcing from that location. You can see certifications who've certified it. You can see information from the supplier themselves. And it gives you this rich picture of all of the organizations and sort of the ecosystem that you have access to for collaboration. I mentioned we're an NGO, we're a pre-competitive tool, and we're governed by a multi-stakeholder board of directors representing all of these different perspectives and more. And I think just 2 ways to transparently frame our model and our platform. First is our public good, which you'll see in a moment. You can go there yourselves, opensupplyhub.org. That's where you can do things like share your production sites, get them cleaned and matched through our algorithm, get access to OSIDs for all of those locations, search and download that data, and find overlaps between different supply chains and data sets. And then on top of the public good, we offer 2 premium features that are available for a fee, and you'll see some of those and hear us talk about some of those today. The first is the ability to pull just your data into an interactive supplier map that you can embed on your website. So when you upload your data on Open Supply Hub, your website automatically updates with your supplier data and a map that matches your branding. We'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. And then our API, which essentially anything that you can do manually on the public good, you can do automatically via the API. So if you wanted to be sharing your data and every time a new supplier gets added to your PLM, they automatically show up in Open Supply Hub, the API enables that. If you want to do a big sort of automated data cleaning exercise, the API enables that. So those are the 2 features that are available for a fee, and we can talk more about that and share that pricing with you later in the presentation. We work across sectors and across supply chains. For those who know us well, our roots are in apparel, so you'll see a really strong data set there. But in the last year and a half since we expanded beyond apparel, we've seen really strong growth in the sectors that you see here and more. And we are a multi-stakeholder tool. So this session is really focused on brands and retailers. So this is the perspective we're really talking about today. But all different types of organizations are making use of, sharing, getting value on or from Open Supply Hub. And we'll share this presentation with you so you can learn more about those, but an acknowledgement that this is very much a multi-stakeholder effort. And again, we'll share this with you, but a snapshot of some of the hundreds of brands and retailers who are already sharing their data on our platform. So you're certainly not alone if you are thinking about starting on this journey. And before I hand it over to Ariane to talk a little bit about the platform and show it off to you, just a quote from one of our supporters and companies sharing data on Open Supply Hub. We know that Open Supply Hub and its standardized supply chain data will be a key piece in identifying areas where we can collectively focus our attention with the goal that products and services are being provided in a way that respects human rights and the environment. So with that, Ariane, how can Open Supply Hub help the people on this call?
Many ways. We're gonna jump from the Canva presentation over to Open Supply Hub so you can see what it looks like and how you can use it. And so all the things that Hannah has been telling you about can take a bit more flesh in your mind. So this is Open Supply Hub, opensupplyhub.org. At a basic level, you can share your supplier list on Open Supply Hub and get a free interactive searchable map of all of your suppliers. So you can see here with Target, we can see that Target has 4,700 plus facilities, and we can search through countries with Bangladesh and sector with apparel, which narrows it down to 73 facilities. And so not only this, every single facility has a contributor, has a profile. Like this, for example, with Zaber and Zubair. You can see on every single facility, first the OSID, which is a very important part of how Open Supply Hub is going to simplify your work life. So we'll get back to that one. You can see the location with the address geocoded and all the different variations of the address that have been submitted by different contributors for this specific facility. So here you can see that the algorithm has done a really great job at matching all of those different addresses with this specific facility and this specific OSID. You have the different versions of the name, so in the exact same way as the addresses that have been matched. You can have, you can see the sectors, processing type, parent company, the type of facility, the type of products that they make, and even their numbers of workers. And very interestingly, you can also see all of the contributors that have uploaded this specific facility on Open Supply Hub as part of their list. And as you can see, we have a very diverse range of contributors So we have CSOs with RISE all the way at the bottom with the Apparel Impact Institute. We have certification bodies with Fair Trade and Ecotex, service providers and MSIs with Worldly, ZDHC, and Fair Factory Clearinghouse, and brands like you with H&M, Marks and Spencer, Target, Lidl, etc. So as you can see, this data comes from a lot of different sources, which is also what makes this data so reliable, because a lot of different people have gotten the same information. But as we teased earlier, that's just the beginning of Open Supply Hub, and Open Supply Hub can help you in so many other ways. And the first one is with making sure that the addresses that you have been provided by your suppliers are reliable, basically. So you've probably experienced that sometimes the information that you get from your supplier is a bit different. Sometimes maybe they've moved, maybe actually it's two different facilities, or you don't know if it's a duplicate or not. And so what Open Supply Hub does so well with its algorithm is that it's going to match the addresses that actually are the same. So it does a really great job at removing duplicates from your database. So here we had 16 different versions of the address for this specific facility, and the algorithm has reunited all of them under one facility profile with one OSID. So that means that if you were unsure, if you had two similar addresses for this one and you were unsure if these were duplicates or not, then you just have to put them through Open Supply Hub, and then you have your answer. That is also something that we mentioned, the API. This is something that you can automate through the API. So as soon as some new data comes through your database, you can put it through our cleaning algorithm and you get your data deduplicated. And we often have contributors asking us, how is it so that I submitted X amount of facilities and now I only have X amount? And that's actually because we've been doing the deduplication work. And so that's a really wonderful feature of Open Supply Hub, which you can use completely for free. You only have to upload your data to the platform. Another way to streamline your communications with your suppliers and make it easier for you to have up-to-date information from them is to invite them to claim their facility on Open Supply Hub. So you can see here that this facility has been claimed. It has a little badge. And when a facility is claimed, the owner or the manager of the facility takes ownership of the profile on Open Supply Hub. And you can see with this facility that we have a lot of additional data points, like the native language name, for example, the website, contact email, phone number, and certifications as well, so that the owner of the facility can showcase also what they do. They can showcase their contributors at the bottom as well, and also provide to whomever wants to work with them, partner with them, or have more information about them, all of the information that would be asked about in a report, and basically facilitate due diligence, and filling your due diligence obligations. So we ask our contributors to ask their suppliers to claim their profiles. So the amount of facility profiles that are claimed on Open Supply Hub is growing daily, which makes everyone's life much easier. Something else that we can help you with that Hannah has already touched upon is data cleaning when you want to connect with a new provider, or with an MSI, so like Mammoth here. So when you want to work with a new tool for reporting, traceability, etc., usually you have to do a lot of data cleaning to match your database with their identification system. And so with Open Supply Hub, you don't need to do that because you already have your OSID, which is free, accessible, and will always be. And you just have to connect the two databases. So for example, if you want to connect with Worldly, You just need to, if you have the OSID and they have the OSID, your databases communicate in an instant, and you don't need to open your Excel spreadsheets and look at it manually yourself. You know that the OSID matches, so it's the same facility, end of story, and you've saved yourself a lot of time to do more productive things. So here was the case with Mammoth, who was able to integrate and connect with a lot of different MSIs as part of their work. And then now that you have saved a lot of time by automating all of this manual data cleaning and everything, you're able to actually get into the due diligence work and maybe create some programs or some investments, some sort of collaborative work. And then you're wondering, how do I find other brands or other organizations to partner with? And so with Open Supply Hub, you can very easily find the other organizations that are sourcing from the same facilities as you. So here with HEMA, let's say I'm HEMA and I want to partner with the Walt Disney Company. I type both our contributor names and I take the little show only shared facilities. And I can see that we have 37 facilities that we both source from in the world. And then maybe I want to narrow down in focus on China or this specific area. And then I can see that we have 33 facilities that we both source from. And I see that one of those facilities has been claimed. So maybe there is even the contact of the facility. I can reach out to Disney. And I can see that we have 10 additional contributors that I can reach out to take part to my project and make everything better and easier, basically. So that literally took us 30 seconds to do, instead of having to scroll the internet and search for information for hours. Something else that is extremely useful that Open Supply Hub can help you with is in times of crisis, like when, for example, the earthquake happened in Turkey. We can help you through the little mapping tool that Hannah has just used, like the custom area. We can help you map, here in this case, the zone of the earthquake and see which facilities may have been impacted by the earthquake. And that's really helpful when you want to take a responsible decision regarding how to continue the relationship with the affected facilities. So there are ways to work together so that the facilities who are impacted are able to get back on their feet with our assistance and collaboration. And we are not done. The next thing that we can help you with is sharing your supply chain information and promoting it either internally, either externally. So many things that we can do with Open Supply Hub. So the first thing that you can do once you have contributed your data is to share the link that you can see here in the search bar. With your contributor ID, you can share this link with anyone internally or externally. And what it's going to show is the map of your facilities, this exact map with the name of your facilities and the facility profiles to anyone who basically follows that link. So you can put it on your website as well. So to showcase your transparency efforts. And there are ways to optimize even more the way you're showcasing your data so that you can show even more how the extent of your transparency work. So here, for example, Zeeman has updated 3 different lists with their 3 different tiers. So they have been able to map out their 3 different tiers and they share it on Open Supply Hub. And so we can look at each specific list and see where their facilities are located and obviously who sources from it, etc. For every single tier. Another example of how you can showcase your transparency work is if you have a couple of different brands, or that you work with a couple of different brands, and you can showcase them in the same way by list. So here with Columbia Sportswear, who owns Sorel and Prana and Mountain Hardware, they have been dividing the facility list by brand, so it's easier to search for anyone who needs to. And so for every single data set that you're going to find, you can download it into a machine readable format, so CSV or Excel, like for Colombia. And that is limited to 10,000 facilities, which is not the case with the API. So if you are interested in being able to download large amounts of data, the API is also a great tool for that. And so here, if we were to click download, we would have a beautiful Excel or CSV file that would showcase all of the data points that are included in not only the shared contributors, that would show the whole list and the other contributors that also source from the facility. So it's also a great document that you can just download and that is easy to share. And if you would like to go one step further with how you showcase your data, you can get our embedded map, which is basically your private open supply hub, like Asda has done here. And so they have been able to customize their map to match their branding, and they are here showcasing their supply chain in the way that was the most appropriate for them. And the way Asda has been showcasing its transparency work is that they have been adding additional data points to every single facility. So they have, for example, the percent of female workers, percent of migrants, percent of temporary, the date of the last audit. So with their embedded map, they are able to showcase in a neutral way the amount of transparency work that they've been doing. And so for the embedded map, we've been able to, if you're interested in getting an embedded map, we've been able to get for you a discount, which is not something that we can do often as a nonprofit. So if you're interested in showcasing your supply chain data on your website for the next 10 days, if you use the code BRANDWEBINAR10 at the checkout on the embedded map sales page, you'll be able to get 10% off. And so that's a great opportunity for you to showcase and to tell the story of all the work that you've been doing for your transparency. And so on top of, and if you wish to only share on Open Supply Hub, that's also possible as well. And it is not only helping you with all of your transparency efforts, it's also contributing to the development of a public good, which benefits people and the planet.
Thank you so much, Ariane. That was great. So before we get into the Q&A, we'll just leave you with some calls to action, ways to get started if the things we've shared are of interest to you. And the first piece is, we've been talking about transparency, sharing your suppliers. We showed some examples with multiple tiers of data. But ultimately, as you get started, this is not an all or nothing situation. Sometimes we talk to companies who say, if I start sharing my data, do I have to share 100% of my suppliers, every single tier? No. And what we often say for those just getting started on the transparency journey is, what's the right place to start for you? Maybe there is a tier, a region, a product line, an issue area where you can start with a slice of your data, and either maybe that's a really easy one to start with, or maybe it's one where you'll get a lot of benefit quickly, show proof of concept to the rest of your organization or stakeholders, and then be able to expand the data set from there. So maybe start by asking those questions, and then once you know the data set that you're starting with, if you're working with Open Supply Hub, it's pretty straightforward. We have sort of a template and upload instructions, which we can share with you that you can use to format your data, or if you're using the API to get connected that way. Once you upload it, that's when it hits our algorithm and our data moderation team who'll review and get your data into a good place with all of the OSIDs. And then once it's live, it's published on Open Supply Hub. You get that link. You can sign up for an embedded map to be able to share on your website. And that's really just the start of the journey. As we've said, transparency is one piece of the puzzle, but ultimately you're looking for those outcomes that come next. And we've talked about all of these sort of benefits and next steps already, so I won't spend too much time on this piece, but more to give you these slides once we close. Once you've shared your data, doing things like getting it into a really interoperable format with OSIDs, getting your suppliers to claim their profiles so that you have that high quality data coming straight from all of your suppliers directly, finding other organizations to collaborate with. So lots of different ways to sort of maximize transparency once you've shared it. And we know that deciding to share your supplier data is usually not a decision that you as an individual get to make for your entire company. And that when you start this conversation, it's the start of many, many conversations probably happening across your organization. And so just sharing some tips from other companies who've gone through this journey and want to make it as easy as possible for others. The big three are loop in the right teams from the start. It's different for different companies, but maybe you'll need like CSR, ethical trade, marketing, procurement, IT, whatever the group is, get them all sort of looped in, bought in. We can support you with demos and tools and resources for the right stakeholders. So let us know what you need, and we can help you with sort of securing that buy-in internally. The second one, because this can sometimes take a while to review and change, is to look at your agreements with your suppliers. We know a lot of companies either have NDAs built in or haven't sort of enabled third-party data sharing in their agreements. And there's a pretty big trend with the companies we're working with to eliminate those NDAs, to get language into agreements to ensure that data can be shared for initiatives like this without having to go through sort of additional approval processes. So this is something to get started with early to see sort of what are the changes that you might need to make and who do you need to work with to get that going, because that could end up being the thing that holds up the entire project. And then the last piece, it's not specific to this kind of work. As humans, we all need this, but think about the deadlines that you need. We've worked with a lot of companies where this was just a conversation for years and years and years because they didn't have something that they were working toward. So what are those sort of internal touch points that you can hold people accountable to and really try to drive progress? So thank you so much for joining today and listening to us. We will, as we said, share the recording and the deck and some resources following this presentation. We'll share a quick start guide that summarizes a lot of this information in one page. And we'll also just make one more offer, which is if you want to talk to a peer company about their journey, let us know. We have a lot of companies who've said we're happy to talk to other organizations who want to learn how we're leveraging this tool or how transparency has helped our organization. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Our email address is on our website, but info@opensupplyhub.org, and we're happy to get you connected. And I think the final thought to summarize everything we've shared today is, we're thrilled about any kind of transparency. It's all progress, no matter how small, but the change that we see is really going to be incremental at best if we're not designing these transparency systems and processes and tools with the why in mind. Why is this strategic for my organization? Why is this critical for the work that we're doing? And if we build in that way, then you're going to see so much more benefit from transparency, and we're all going to sort of benefit from higher quality data, collaboration, and everything else that transparency can bring. So thank you, and let's do a few minutes of Q&A. Do we have any good questions, Ariane?
We do. The first one is from Alexander, who asks, transparency includes both gaining visibility into your supply chain by yourself, learning about your supply chain, and disclosing this information to the public. So two different processes. If some/most advantages come simply from gaining visibility without disclosure, how do you convince brands to go the extra steps and disclose this to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of what we were talking about today. It's those pieces around finding collaborators. You're not going to get that by just holding that data yourself. You need to share that to be able to understand who are the organizations that are connected to my suppliers, and inviting others who you might not even know about or who aren't sharing data on the platform yet to reach out to you and connect and collaborate. And the second piece is that idea that we were talking about of the sort of supply chain data commons, that we're all doing this duplicative work. Like you're talking about this process of sort of tracing your supply chain, of getting all of this information. If you do that by yourself in a closed system, you're not going to benefit from all of the richness that can come from sharing all of the different sort of variations that come into the names and addresses of production sites, and making sure that everybody is sort of building toward this high quality interoperable data set that we can all use. So it's a lot of the pieces that we talked about today, where sure, doing the work yourself and figuring out your supply chain is wonderful, but the true benefit gets unlocked when you're sharing that openly and are able to collaborate with others.
And the next question is also from Alexander, and we have kind of answered it, but maybe for the sake of clarity. Do you plan to account for multi-tier sub-supplier relationships on your platform in the future?
Yeah, so a few ways you can do this. You saw the example with Zayman where they have sort of the multi-tier data about the supply chain that they have found. So if you've gone deeper into your supply chain and you have that information, you just upload multiple lists to your account, one for each tier, essentially. We also have when you're sort of encouraging your suppliers to claim their profiles, you can also be asking your suppliers to share their list of suppliers on Open Supply Hub. We have a nice case study with a renewable energy company, Sunrock, who's doing just that right now, where every time they onboard with a new supplier, they're asking that supplier to share their data on our platform so they get more and more visibility. So there are different ways that we can do that. Again, we're not a traceability platform. We're not trying to bill ourselves as one, but as you get more of that visibility, you can connect that to Open Supply Hub, and hopefully your traceability platform is using OSIDs so that it's really easy to run those two systems together.
And so Trude had a similar question, and maybe just like one specific part of her question. If,
Yeah.
for example, the second tier supplier shares their sub-suppliers on Open Supply Hub, what would be the recommended way of organizing the lists?
Yeah, so what you might do in that situation, if you wanted those sub-suppliers associated with you, is so your supplier has shared that sub-supplier, fantastic. Those sub-suppliers are now connected to your supplier in their account. You can then go on and grab your supplier's sub-suppliers and add them to whichever tier list is most relevant for you in your account to associate them with your name and your supply chain.
And another question from Julie, who is asking if we are interoperable with traceability solutions. So the question
There
I
you
answer
go.
also partly.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very much the vision and the goal, and happening more and more, where traceability platforms are adopting the OSID. And so essentially you're able to, as you're doing your traceability work, ensure that each of the sites and production locations that are getting identified have the OSID and can run really nicely into your transparency work and any other platforms that you might be connected to.
A question, an anonymous question. Are we planning to make it possible to upload documents such as wastewater or audit reports?
Great question. Right now, I wouldn't make any promises for that to be in our near-term roadmap, and a couple of reasons for that. One, the reason we've been able to grow so quickly is because we do have this, for lack of a better word, sort of neutral, non-controversial data set where we're just talking about these really basic data points around where is the production point, who's connected to it. And we've heard from different stakeholders that if we start expanding into other data points, then we start to have questions around sort of trust and who gets to share which data, and it just unlocks a whole lot of other conversations that might keep some stakeholders from using the platform. Instead, what we find really exciting is when we connect to other systems and tools that have that kind of data. So you think about the Social Labor and Convergence Program has audit data, and they're capturing OSIDs in their system. If SLCP is listed as a contributor on a profile in Open Supply Hub, you can click on their profile, go to their system, and know that you can get that sort of additional data from whatever system that may be. Now, someday maybe we'll add different risk layers and different sort of data sets to the platform, but for now, that's very much the position of our organization.
Thank you. Questions from Caroline, who is asking how we handle the different naming conventions for the same facilities for different contributors, and also asking another question that maybe we'll ask just after your answer.
Yeah, essentially, without getting too much into the tech, our algorithm is sort of trained on supply chain data and sort of how different organizations and countries are formatting the names and addresses of suppliers. And so whenever a new facility or production location is uploaded to the platform, the algorithm is comparing that entry to all of the entries that are already in Open Supply Hub to see if there's a match, and then essentially assigns different confidence levels. So if it's more than 80% confident that this is a match, okay, it's basically the same thing, or it matches a lot of similar attributes that it's been trained on, it automatically makes the match. If it's less than 50% confident, too many things are different, I don't see any matches, it creates a new profile for that site. And if it's somewhere in between, in that 50 to 80% confidence range, that's when it goes to our human data moderation team. And so they also have been working really closely with supply chain data, and they're able to deal with some of those trickier and more complicated cases that need a human touch, to get in touch with stakeholders, to do additional research, to figure out sort of what the final decision should be in terms of the match.
Thank you. And then the second question was, the contributor tab has a timestamp. What happens when a contributor uploads updated data? Does it override existing data, or does the data become obsolete after a period of time?
Yeah, so this is up to you as the data owner, sort of how you want this to go. But essentially, you have options when you update your data. So say you have a supplier list already on the system, and that was for last year, and you're uploading a list for this year. You can choose to replace the previous year's list, and what that will do is make that list inactive and only display your current list. If you have stopped working with any suppliers in that time, so they were on your old list, but they're not on your new one, it essentially breaks that connection publicly. So you'll no longer be connected to that supplier you no longer work with. They still exist in the system. It just becomes an anonymous contribution. So it would say a brand or retailer had shared this data instead of the name of your company. So we don't delete data. Obviously, that facility could continue to work with other brands, other stakeholders, even if you're no longer connected to them. Similarly, between uploads, if you want to remove one particular supplier on your list, you can just go onto the back end and remove them, and you get similar behavior. You can also decide, and some organizations do, that you want your historical data up. You want people to see how your supply chain has changed. You want to be able to respond to questions about your supply chain from previous years. Then you just don't hit replace. And in your account, you'll see all of the historic data, and stakeholders will be able to as well. So they'll see your 2022 list, your 2023 list, your 2024 list, and be able to see both any information you've shared about that list, like this data is current to XYZ date, as well as sort of the time date stamp of when you uploaded it to the platform. Great questions. Maybe one more?
Yeah, one more. Isaac is asking if I need to search for common facilities among multiple data contributors, each having uploaded multiple lists. Does selecting specific lists and ticking shared facilities give common facilities among the selected lists?
It should, yeah. It depends sort of what the different combination is that you're looking for. But for instance, I've done a search where John Lewis Partnership shares their waitress data in a specific list, and I want to look at that in combination with another grocery store. So that's very much possible. But if you have questions about a specific search or want our help, feel free to email us and we can support you. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. If we didn't get to your questions, they are noted. We will try to share resources that answer everyone's questions in the follow-up. Thank you so much for joining. And please do be in touch if you are interested in using Open Supply Hub. Have a wonderful day.